What's your email?
M.
Dot.
STADT.
89, you know?
Yeah, still got it.
Still got it. What do you know? Good.
From coast to coast. Heard of to California, huh?
I was in New York last year. But yeah,
But still, yeah. I mean, gotta be enjoying the California weather.
it's pretty nice.
Let me get out of here. First one to get this started.
Oh.
On YouTube?
Yes, and on Google and everything else. You can see that in case it goes wrong.
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't know how to operate it, but
Yeah, it's just this camera here. Okay, the table moves, it could shake and get out of visual. So,
okay, yeah.
all right, thank you.
Cool.
Good luck, y'all.
Did you send that?
Huh? No, not you.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's
I got it. I got it.
You got it.
So, you all get it?
I got it. I'm still waiting for it. You gave me Gmail, right?
Yeah. Okay then. I can just give it to you on flash drive.
Yeah, we'll just flash.
Alright, are you gonna just look at
Good morning, Steve Bieber.
You guys about to start the meeting?
Yes.
Alright.
Okay. Everyone good? The war on drugs is a form of social control that perpetuates white supremacy via the mass incarceration and subsequent disenfranchisement of people of color. Alexander 6. Most Americans go back to slavery and the Jim Crow laws were moral forms of social control used to suppress black and brown people. New form of social control that is mass incarceration of people of color. This sort because federalism and its methods are maintaining white supremacy, although African Americans have been compared to less than 7% of the population in Christ. Half the prison population, 1 in 3 African American men is either in prison on probation or on parole. Electors and Latinos are not far behind the war. Drugs is the most damaging manifestation of hostility to communities color mass incarceration. Fights white and legal social benefits, segregating, incarcerating, withering, unemployment, youth segment of the black and brown population. 9. Black is equal and adequate education, barred from certain forms of employment, relegating them to the worst neighborhoods of the white elite, ensure that the whites will never occupy the bottom right of the hierarchy. This new form of social control has become entrenched in the social, political, and economic structure, mass incarceration, and the inferiority of certain classes of people to find leverage, whether it's genius and new systems that successfully blames the victim. Black and brown people are segregated, shifted political rights, and uses the economic benefit of poverty whites because they choose to engage in criminal behavior, and uses the world's largest incarcerator in the war on drugs helps them maintain that based on the creation of an artificial caste system that most impacts black men and women. With Alexander 14, uses become the world's largest incarcerator with 2.2 million prison African American American men and women making a disproportionate number of those in prison. There are important victories and legalized marijuana. Speaking against mandatory and no felons transplant to raise concerns about the size of the prison. State the first time 40 years since we support haven't been able to close broken homes because we declared war on them. Some build the prison while I'm supposed to build target children as stopping search and prison. We settled them criminal record jail them recently where they discriminating against the rest of their lives and through the Colorado Washington legalized marijuana. These are critically important steps. It should review the opinion approach. We have to tell the whole truth. We have to agree. It's not enough to stop. We have to repair. And this discrimination fuels the continuous extermination of minority populations. We must speak up in the face of injustice. BW 12. It is important to remember why marijuana is deemed illicit. Why reason Americans will open our eyes and city strategy by fair policy laws for design and control Mexico's poverty. Marijuana is still illicit and laws will justify demand. A population deep suspicion and poor because of strategy reducing marijuana laws for prison poor minority population must stop. Now we have seen much evidence of benign nature of marijuana, misinformation about the effect brought by the lifetime of suffering the marijuana conviction can bring. Because of annihilation, minority population law designed to identify options and annihilate these populations, these property, taking away freedom. And institutions like community for our business, we can stop this happening. We have no time to waste tax regularly. Now is the unique opportunity for citizens and not for freedom to consume marijuana, but against the suffering that results from criminalization and the war on people of color that these racist policies represent outweighs institutional structure of domination, create everyday violence. We should reject single focus impacts of people working against the ongoing destruction of black bodies that goes on every day. I'm not 89. Peace can become an abstract concept of cultural war. Peace is active in the constant wars being waged against people. Color past people go to fear what they fear. They're not mindful that people have already been destroyed as part of the power solution. The color line is difficult to persuade. The rented record shots started African deserts, victims, already killed fields, and nuclear wars, major human life, peace, movement, subject like historical. Check that those people the color movements, close beliefs, call them cultural, racial, dominance, peace movements, racist, blinders, wars, peace, freedom movements, swords, peace, development, culture, and historically mobilizing against women, color, political investments, white men, and government directly from the Holocaust, people, color, men, and women of color resistance, fought back, were slaughtered. Enslaved peace, not really the absence of conflict, labels, white middle class comfort, the litany of you will be lord to direct by the white man's black woman. Supremacy, institutionalization of world violence, the Holocaust of people's code face daily, Holocaust is threat to world peace, as prevents from a thorough nuclear war, and struggles against racism, require ethical question, live, and go and challenge, justifies violence against all others, 92K. The struggle against racism is undertaken without sexual cannot be those towards racism in reveal the footholds means to measure what is human to cut the racist universe at select degree is endorse fear, justice, and violence to accept the outside world to be possible victim choice and conduct, but some morally in addition to the establishment of the human order for which racism is very negative selves redundancy, one cannot find, or lower level legislative order of racism because racism signifies the inclusion of the other and is there subjection to violence, racism, truly capital sin, and justice, and gender violence, death, not just society contains within themselves sees, but some death refuses racism, petition for morality, and death culture ignores and masks the historical oppression of people who color the world is already crumbling around them. 189. In a nuclear war, 25 million people will be killed. The same number of active people who died. The slave trade for people of color. Starvation is already problem. Housing is already blighted. The humane climate live on the streets. People of color. The world ended centuries ago. World with language, customs, ways, and death culture live in this when even more convinced concerned with death. Then they would like willing to demonstrate survival and cost of every day became safe issue, but not linked with daily issues. Racism with people of color continue to be murdered. Acts of war, nuclear genocide, are declared on our jobs, our housing, our schools, our families, and our lands. And thus, James and I advocate that the United States should legalize marijuana. Solvency. Marijuana should be the starting point for discussion of any drug war allows vital transformation that significantly benefits communities impacted the most. Franklin 14. Prohibition of marijuana is unfair. The force of death from many Latinos. Legalization before prohibition will reduce racial disparity. Legalization of marijuana is one step towards ending the war with the new land will eradicate systematic racism. Is most effectively we can do address the new law that means that no more arrest for marijuana possession. This change will have real measurable impact on people of color unlike criminalization. New laws no more arrest for marijuana possession. Taylor taking such that legalization may further get skills in favor of people who has some of this change. Nothing believe that the new law since confusion. Human legalization is proud different because of the ambiguity of criminalization. Cops over arrest users of marijuana through technicalities. One of the new because power stop and in New York marijuana is ready to see how these use might be used in Colorado. The marijuana industry is now legal above ground. Police won't be able to racially profile. We will reduce your problems associated with the illicit market and making legalization of marijuana with conversations of structural oppression maintains progressive momentum necessary to address the war on drugs. Ramsey 13. Marijuana prohibition is harm to community to improve application of marijuana laws and under the apply to existing laws to prevent black families in black marriage, jail, child, one device over by structural wasting the outcomes of any for the CDH, the UNH, nationwide legalization, media law, you have a new lane, rest every from marijuana officials, normal legalization, then 5 to 10 years, develop that system where town police conversation about discrimination should be front and center associated with race and justice, drug enforcement, cuts celebrating the marijuana, environmental will be able to ensure positive change institutional racism, drug policy, work having something that gain traction, I expect it to be drug reports and prison counts, people code, one of the most breached applications, the last one, the most persuasive points for reform, and empirics prove that our form of activism has results coalescing around marijuana legalization has changed at the governmental level. B13. Proposition 215 was gained to federal officials payment state local law enforcement reaction to medical marijuana grounds so by the deploying paramilitary units 20 states out there legalizing cannabis with their use this much as earned. The Obama administration would never a bunch of marijuana legislation legalization towards our percent challenge to policy with marijuana should galvanize active energy and left to right civil rights organization actually law enforcement practice target people that also joined the cause. Operating the emerging marijuana majority united opposition program was how advocates crusade against pot and coalition inclusive approaches are key, linking the end of mass incarceration to all people ensures that we can end the caste system that designates certain bodies as part of society. Alexander 10. who is the outside advocates fighting for judgment women's gays and immigrants, Latinos, Asian Americans. The advocacy seems to be us includes everyone at a time gambling to persuade white representative choose racial status whether it is blacks. Not the emergence of new caste system. Nothing could be more important than finding a way to create an interracial coalition for justice. Attempts come to give racial rights to gay without this compensation. Top should be how else can come to include all these accomplishments. Maybe giving up strategies to exacerbate racial tensions. Meaningful progress can be made. We must give up the drug war movement, the diversity and incarceration sufficient to fail to cultivate care and serve the humans of our class, race, nationality, including whites. The collapse in incarceration will not mean death of racial caste. Every new system of racialized control and worse, given to the sake of action, required rights, approach, around the positive vision of what we try to put this open door to meaningful lines between people of all colors. We begin to see their interests lie no longer competition for resources in a zero-sum game. And propulsives of specific policy actions like legalizing marijuana are the only way to begin the classic grain top process, Item 11. Suppose we mistake from that a radical transformation, try to produce or change these much inside our process, make it more deeply better than critics suppose it makes. Suppose that structures will class when they are shown incoherent, they reflect ways of living rather than merely intellectual arguments, now resolve the structures, or someone dismantle their class will produce more humane system, or fleeing over strategies, have the limits, what at least second century rules that might actually be implemented as opposite to. Suppose the writing search program there's vacancy about the subversion would consist of organized enough for no practical programs, they appear unreasonable utopian. And our apps focus on how change happens rather than what change occurs best. We craft debate as a type of movement building that can be conceptualized as harmonious with reform efforts that give the movement critical mass. Great change, Alexander 10. The notion that reforms can be accomplished to disconnect the advocacy struggle seems to be reports that less with their balls deeply followed public processes the different best people we had to make case in the court of public opinion. Those who believe that mass incarceration can be on sex light overturning public tests are engaged in or isolated victories can be won with the absence of fundamental shift of the conscience of public to hold the rules and remain intact to extend the major change or achieve without complete shift. The system will be around the caste system will emerge and a new form challenge of the racial order use of suppressive field and also racial meetings identity ideology teams natural modern Jim Crow mass religion virtues propagate critical legitimacy demands the civil rights activists help us fight the movement nothing said on low brown accomplished little before distributed call for movement building, exclusion reform against the work movement building part of that is subconsciously movement building work. The question now whether to engage in reform or how to question how many reform work is even more important than specific reforms. We see the way pursued reforms that contribute with dismantle mass incarceration and other reform will successfully disrupt the nation's racial equilibrium challenge the system will not be used to the competition will determine the system not undermining beyond the risk of winning isolated battle solution larger war. And the first question is asked the affirmative is if it would decrease the number of people locked in cages. If the answer is yes, we'll have to help continue to keep the decarceration movement. Prison culture 14. Some people have testified about engaging in prison reform. Answers no. I've been for post who wrote so the sure prison be abolished. No less on reform. Is about cancer. Don't wait for the trend of cure. Yeah, discover before treating me. Doctor, most all actors in prison abolitions distinguish between reforms, non-reforms, reforms, sheep trying reforms, force. We can only get non-reforms, force. The word changes does not create more obstacles. The large close pre-abolition with shreds as a movement. I spent system of violence, non-reforms, reforms, but necessarily decrease number of people locked in cages. Starting points that prisons are intrinsically evil should be abolished. The first prison reform should be to have as few people as possible confined for a short time as possible. And this framing is the only way to avoid co-option by the right while we taking long-term goals of abolition. Chandler 5. We can simultaneously address the needs of people who self-insist currently challenge the efforts by the right to co-opt our attempts to change the system by carefully crafting reform strategies that are about diminishing the power of the system and building on service to it. Focus on strategic decarceration set towards the ultimate abolition of the prisons. Such campaigns focus on changing laws and setting structures that embraces the greatest number of people as such as drug laws. We can implement changes to language and ensure the ground undermine abolition. We claim language has been applied appropriately, but the way the abolition principle protect the process not overnight transition reforms are necessary. The way the abolition but anti-prison actors need more is to move away from reform as an endpoint. Okay. 6. Got a timer. So.
Let me just get the time.
Cool. Yeah, so.
Okay. First question.
Yeah.
Your homologic piece of evidence describes that the world has ended for people of color because of a system of subjugation that is perpetuated by the state and civil society.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go on to say that legalization and using state regulations to change is good. Can you please tell me why this is not mutually exclusive?
Right. So one, we want to build this sort of coalition that will end the reasons that like civil society is bad, right? And like we don't try to use state regulation to change things.
Well, no,
right?
okay. Let me just rephrase my question.
Yeah.
My question was like you were saying that we could make change. You said empirics prove that our activism solves because it causes change at the governmental level, and it seems that your solvency is the linchpin of it is this governmental level. Right. Why is this governmental level key? One, and why is it not mutually exclusive with the claim homologic makes? Okay, well, we think it's key because if it's not changed, then all the negative harms we've identified still happen, right? People of color still get arrested for no good reason because of marijuana charges. People get
First of all, what are people of color?
Non-Caucasian people.
Non-Caucasian people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
any non-Caucasian person is a person of color.
I don't think we can like
Like,
come
it's
on.
So
like-
anybody
like,
not
how-
from the
how-
Caucasus Mountains is a person of color? That's what I'm just asking.
I mean,
I think it's probably inappropriate to homogenize like all peoples as just people of color. I think people of color is the term of art that a lot of uses to refer to
Yeah,
oppressed
like,
populations.
yeah, like that.
Okay, so again, my question was that mutual exclusivity.
Wasn't on mutual. Well, yes, like we'll concede that the status quo is racist.
Okay.
That's the one you see, right? But we think that we can build a broad movement to try to change the status quo, right?
So you think
I
all
That's
think
the
that, like,
Alexander evidence.
The affirmative is an instance of reducing the impact, the negative implications of civil society. It's a form of negative state action causing the government to remove itself.
How do you
and
reduce
racial
absolute
prejudice.
racial domination?
Yeah, we say that the marijuana being illegal is a form of that racial domination.
All right,
and
what
its
about
use.
brothers and sisters getting locked up for crack charges?
Right, yeah. So we say that like what the 1AC does is a starting point for the abolition of prisons and the end of the war on drugs. Right. We say that the 1AC is a practical reform that will be able to build this movement.
Legalize entails creation of more legislation. Yes or no?
No.
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 So how does your mechanism work if there's like on the governmental level? What does this change look like? Are laws repealed or are laws made?
Well, we advocate that that all restrictions on the use and sort of production of marijuana are.
So there's a law to make restrictions on the use.
No,
But
No,
there's
we
prohibition.
repeal prohibition, right?
Yeah.
We get rid of laws that restrict marijuana. Yeah, that's-
Sorry. Yes.
Can I use your stand?
Of course. Here you go.
It'll just be one off. Okay, good. All right. Now I have one radio phonograph. I plan to have 5. There's a certain acoustical deadness in my hole. When I have music, I want to feel its vibrations. Not only with my ear, but with my whole body. I'd like to I'd like to hear 5 recordings of Louis Armstrong playing and singing. What did I do to be so black and blue? All at the same time. Sometimes now I listen to Louis while I have my favorite dessert of vanilla ice cream and slow gin. I pour the red liquid over the white mound, watching it glisten and the vapor rising as Louis bends that military instrument into a beam of lyrical sound. Perhaps I like Louis Armstrong because he's made poetry out of being invisible. I think it must be because he's unaware that he is invisible. And my own grasp of invisibility aids me to understand his music. Once when I asked for a cigarette, some jokers gave me a reefer, which I lighted when I got home and sat listening to my phonograph. It was a strange evening. Invisibility, let me explain, gives one a slightly different sense of time. You're never quite on the beat. Sometimes you're ahead of and sometimes you're behind. Instead of the swift and imperceptible flowing of time, you are aware of its nodes, those points where time stands still. Or which it leaps ahead, and you slip into the brakes and look around. That's what you hear vaguely in Louis' music. Once I saw a prize fighter boxing a yokel. The fighter was swift and amazingly scientific. His body was one violent flow of rapid rhythmic action. He hit the yokel 100 times. while the yokel held up his arms in stunned surprise. But suddenly, the yokel rolling about in the gale of boxing gloves struck one blow and knocked science, speed, and footwork as cold as a well-digger's posterior. The smart money hit the canvas, the long shot got the nod, the yokel had simply stepped inside of his opponent's sense of time. So under the spell of the reefer, I discovered a new analytical way of listening to music. The unheard sounds came through, and each melodic line existed of itself, stood outside clearly from all the rest, said its piece, and waited patiently for other voices to speak. That night I found myself hearing not only in time but in space as well. I not only entered the music but descended like Dante into its depths, and beneath the swiftness of hot tempo, there was a slower tempo and a cave. And I entered it and looked around and heard an old woman singing a spiritual full of Weltschmerz as flamenco. I'll pause there. And beneath that still, a lower level in which I saw a beautiful girl, the color of ivory, pleading in a voice like my mother as she stood before a group of slave owners who bid for her naked body. And below that, I found a lower level, a more rapid tempo, and I heard someone shout, "Brothers and sisters, my text this morning is the blackness of blackness." And the congregation of voices answered, "That blackness is most black, brother, most black." In the beginning, at the very start, they cried, there was blackness. Preach it! And the sun, Lord, was bloody red. Red. Now black is, the preacher shouted, bloody. I said, black is, preach it, brother. And black ain't. Red, Lord, red. He said it's red. Amen, brother. Black will get you. Yes, it will. And black won't. No, I won't. It do. It do, Lord, and it don't. Hallelujah. I'll put you glory, glory, oh my Lord, in the whale's belly. Preach it, brother, and make you tempt. God Almighty, old Aunt Nellie, black will make you, or black will unmake you. Ain't it the truth, Lord? And at that point, a voice of trombone timbre screamed at me, "Get out of here! Is you ready to commit treason, you fool?" I tore myself away, hearing the old singer of spirituals moaning, "Go curse your God and die. Go curse your God, boy, and die." I stopped and questioned her, asked her what was wrong. "I dearly love my master, son," she said. "You should have hated him," I said. "He gave me several sons," she said, "and because I love my sons, I learned to love their father, though I hated him too." "I too have become acquainted with ambivalence," I said. "That is why I'm here." "I too have become acquainted with ambivalence," I said. "That's why I'm here." "What's that?" "Nothing. A word doesn't explain it." "Why do you moan?" "Nothing. A word doesn't explain it. Why do you moan?" "I moan this way because he's dead," she said. "Then tell me, who is that laughing upstairs?" "Them my sons. They glad." "Yes, I can understand that too," I said. "I laughs too, but I moans too. He promised to set us free, but he could never bring himself to do. Still I love. Still I love. Still I loved him." "Loved him? Loved him, you mean?" "Oh yes, but I love something else even more." "What more? What more? What did you love more?" "Freedom. Freedom," I said. "Maybe freedom lies in hating." "Nah, son. It's in loving. I loved him and give him the poison, and he withered away like a frostbit apple. Them boys would have tore him to pieces with their homemade knives." A mistake was made somewhere, I said. I'm confused. And I wish to say other things, but the laughter upstairs became too loud and moan-like for me. And I tried to break out of it, but I couldn't. Just as I was leaving, I felt an urgent desire to ask her what freedom was and went back. She sat with her head in her hands, moaning softly. Her leather brown face was filled with sadness. Old woman, what is this freedom you love so well? I asked around the corner of my mind. She looked surprised, then thoughtful, then baffled. I done forgot, son. It's all mixed up. First I think it's one thing, then I think it's another. It gets my head to spinning. I guess now it ain't nothing but knowing how to say what I got up in my head, but it's a hard job, son. Too much is done to happen to me in too short a time. It's like I have a fever. Every time I starts to walk, my head gets to swirling and I falls down, or if it ain't that, it's the boys. They get to laughing and wants to kill up all the white folks. They's bitter, that's what they is. But what about freedom? Leave me alone, boy, my head aches. I heard footsteps hurrying behind me. I was sore, and into my being had come a profound craving for tranquility, for peace, for quiet. A state I felt I could never achieve. For one thing, the trumpet was blaring and the rhythm was too hectic. A tom-tom was beating like heart thugs, being drowned out the trumpet, filling my ears. I longed for water. I heard it rushing through the cold veins of my fingers. I touched it. I felt my way, but I couldn't touch it. Because of the footsteps behind me. Hey, Raz. I called. Is it you, Destroyer, Reinhardt? No answer, the only rhythmic footsteps behind me. Once I tried crossing the road, but a speeding machine struck me, scraping the skin from my leg as it roared past, and somehow I came out of it, ascending hastily from this underworld of sound, to hear Louis Armstrong endlessly asking, what did I do to be so black and blue?
So first, when you say that you, am I in the camera or sure? When you say you feel like invisible, all right, what do you mean by that exactly? Like invisible to who? I guess.
I mean, I didn't say that. That's Ralph Ellison saying that.
Okay, so is this? Oh, so is this?
But invisibility, I mean, he gives this example of one day he's walking down the street,
Okay.
right? And this guy bumps into him, and he's like, this motherfucker, how does he not see me, right? I should kill him. And he jumps on him and he beats him up. And then he laughs at himself for doing that because he's like, imagine what the news is going to report.
Right.
A man beat up by an invisible man.
Right. So,
There's no ontological register that can come to understand the position of blackness.
All right.
That there's always invisibility because the white gaze views not to see it. But I would even say that it's not even just the white gaze, it's the world gaze.
Yeah.
That blackness is always positioned outside of the optic, right? Which is why Louis Armstrong and that phonic material has to be centered in the discussion of invisibility.
Sure. So like maybe my partner and I just don't have the like perspective to.
Obviously you don't.
Yeah, fair enough. But
accept that.
Like I do. But would it be fair to say that we have the perspective to say that, being imprisoned is bad necessarily?
I mean, Malcolm X said that if you're black in America, you're born in a prison.
Okay.
The world is a prison for the black.
Right. So
to focus on this as a spectacular institution ignores the quotidian and mundane violence.
Right.
That the war on drugs is not this spectacular thing, but it's this logical planned out, even in its illogic of how it treats.
Don't we talk about that though? Like we our
legalizing Vito starts to ask important questions that will constantly be asked and pushed. Right, to exhaust what the 1AC is trying to say.
Right.
Because it's not just legalizing marijuana.
Right.
You can't even answer a easy solvency claim. It's like, do you create laws or do you get rid of them?
Didn't we say that we get rid of them and don't put any more in?
But there's no
question.
Vito starts to push you. It's like prohibition. There's a bunch of other stuff that comes along with prohibition.
So like
or ending prohibition, excuse me. Like all these liquor stores everywhere. Like there's more to it than just buying liquor. You have to have a license, all this other stuff.
What is the forced position then of invisible bodies, given the nature of civil society's ignorance of them or like lack of recognition of them?
That's the condition of invisibility.
Okay, so like how does that structure like the body standing in relation to civil society?
We're invisible. You just said it. The relation is invisibility, which is a presence of absence.
What about the negative performance is an act of making visible?
The what? What? The negative?
What about the negative 1MC is an act of making bodies visible?
Our claim is not to make people visible. We never said visibility good.
Okay.
Alright.
We'll take that.
It's the same thing. Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, okay. I just let it come. No, I thought it was just making sure. That happens. I mean, it's so good.
Come up 6:05. I'm just gonna.
Welcome back. One love.
Huh?
CP one love.
Yes, yeah. Very new, very new.
Do you know if Michelle's gonna hold around again?
We actually have to start to get that together. But I know there's something, somebody asked that as well, because they're trying to do something. I don't know if that's what you're asking about, or if you're just asking about it, you know.
Well, if there's like a pro division again,
Oh, yeah,
I want in.
yeah, see, yeah, we just have to, do some stuff with like the administration, nothing too crazy, making sure we're official.
Alright.
Did you send it?
Yeah. Joe, have your flash drive. I'll just put it on the flash drive.
I just got it.
Oh, sweet. Order is going to be the decarceration advantage and the solvency advantage. And then the is everybody ready?
Yeah.
You good? Do you want to put cream cheese on your bagel first? Okay.
Sorry.
Decarceration then solvency. Cool. Good to go. All right. First, the decarceration. We think the decarceration advantage forces a couple axiomatic positions which are not refuted by the negative and the one and C. First, that the status quo war on drugs policies perpetuate new and varying forms of social control that are fundamentally different, but also structured along racial and class lines, particularly in the context of marijuana laws and the way that we implement this. America is the world's largest incarcerated, which views the continual extermination of minority populations. This systemic violence. Is the thing that we should be analyzing this round, and accepting the violence against the other is a form of acceptance of civil society and the fact that violence against people perceived as outsiders is true. That is the many evidence read in the 1AC. We think that the axiomatic reason why racialized violence occurs in the status quo is because civil society perceives black, brown, and other colored bodies, as well as differently gendered bodies, as well as differently able bodies, etc., as otherized outsiders who we can justify violence against because they are not the same as us. This axiomatic position means that we should probably take pragmatic reforms, go to the solvency contention. Our pragmatic advocacy between Joe Engel and I, when we started out this, is that the racially desperate impact of marijuana laws is a fundamentally irreprehensible thing, and that's why we advocate for the legalization of marijuana by the United States. We think our thought process of advocating for the United States to do something that chips away at the structure of civil society as well as state structures itself is the key starting point for abolitionist and anti-racist movements. There's a couple of reasons. First is the legalization of marijuana has tangible impacts on prison populations, and the ability of law enforcement to racially discriminate means that worse is not a hindrance to anti-abolitionist movements, which remove the structures of civil society that allow for racially charged violence to be enacted. Second, our advocacy of legalization, opposition to racial and classist violence as a framing issue of not only how we approach the topic, but also how we approach the 1AC as a form of negative state action that provides legitimation momentum to abolitionist and anti-war and drugs movements. Our lead evidence indicates that, for example, in California, when the people began to rally around the idea of marijuana legalization, they were able to effect changes in the way the Obama administration and the DEA implemented marijuana laws, because they were able to convince them that marijuana legalization is a fundamentally good idea and that the racially disparate impact is something that's bad. The Alexander and Ted evidence also indicates that empirical examples of this are true. For example, in Brown v. Board, the legal idea itself did not produce any results. However, the advocacy around it and the ability to garner momentum for social advocacy, such as the 1AC is doing, I frame this as a human rights and racial justice issue, provides momentum to anti-abolitionist and anti-racist movements, which would help reverse the invisibility of society and also reverse racialized violence. The final argument is that concrete policy proposals like the legalization of marijuana are the best forms of rallying points because they cause people from all across the political spectrum to enter in these same coalitions. Our first piece, Alexander and Ted evidence and solvency indicates that coalitional approaches are the best option, and the aspects and how the change happened resolve status quo racist violence because of the forces and integration and acknowledgement of all bodies that exist in the status quo go to the 1MC. First, I think the axioms that I outlined on the case may prove that we're not complicit within the structures of invisibilization. We are forming non-reformist reform that views negative state action as the best method for approaching not only the destruction of the prison system, racially biased justice, but also for anti-racist movement, recognizing that different bodies are not necessarily other bodies that we can justify violence against, and extend the prison culture evidence from solvency. We don't claim that we can solve all forms of violence through just affirming our advocacy, but we do think that we can reverse the negative effects of the war on drugs, which is a key social rallying point according to the UCI Alexander evidence. That makes violence we make violence visible in the status quo against both visible and invisible bodies, which means that regardless of the subject position of the 1NC, we reduce the amount of violence that can be exacted upon different bodies, and the 1AC has no negative effect on their subject position. We believe that we can both objectively and subjectively say that being thrown in prison is probably a bad thing, being separated from your family and friends, being separated from the people that you love, being unable to garner access to be able to garner access to civil society is a fundamentally bad idea, and the prison system is something that ought to be fought against. That's the axioms of the 1AC, and the affirmative is not the end point of the struggle to end structural racism, but a starting point. We can chip away the negative effects of civil society that structures black, brown, and otherized bodies as fundamentally different. Marijuana prohibition doesn't help the privileged class. Our present evidence indicates that this change in unbelief is based on decriminalization, which keeps foreign civil penalties in place and allows people to continue to enact racialized violence. The prison is a good starting point that is normally taken for granted as inevitable. However, as an abstract site, we send out desirables from the ideological work of obscuring the function of racism and capitalism. Davis 3. Why would you for granted even among people who must regrettably accept prison sentences as hardly acceptable to engage serious public discussion about prison life or radical alternatives to prison, even if prison is natural fact of life is difficult to imagine life without them. Prison is present in our lives at the same time. That's why I think about it. It's a counterpart play by ideology and we shape the way we interact with social strain in prison. Function ideologically is abstract, shiny, which undesirables are positive, believing us of the responsibility thinking about real issues affecting these communities and release us of the responsibility seriously engaging with the problems of our society, especially those produced by racism and capitalism. And optimism and solidarity of the 1AC is the best starting point. Pessimism accepts the foundational premise of racism as the starting point for politics, replicating violence. Hooks 96. Americans have internalized the racist assumption that there can be no meaningful violence. White supremacists are alive and taught that they never trust between they can never be trust between superior white and inferior black race. When black people internalize these sentiments, no resistance taking place. Rather, we become complicit. Of course, white people are comfortable with rhetoric that racism cannot be changed. Such thinking socialized white people to remain ignorant. White people who counter black folks are reluctant to admit themselves struggle because there is a pervasive feeling of hopelessness. Nothing will ever change. How can anyone hold these feelings? We study the history of racism in this society and see how much change makes a logical sense. Clearly, we have not gone far enough. We must collectively renew our commitment to democratic vision of racial justice and beloved community solidarity are grounded in commitment of shared vision. And we think the policy focus is the best way to combat racism. Well, the 1NC process proof that they believe that life is an ontological addition. However, we don't think that's true. We think it's a product of the structure the state and civil society produced. Louis 13. Anti-black racism and creation of explicit policy choices possible to expand this prejudice using public policy. There's nothing natural about black-white divide that is defined American history, white Europeans, and human contact of black Africans well before the slave trade. Without anti-black racism, made particular choices to make black segments, saving African indentured servants and allowing the white counterpart's chance of upward mobility. Colonial landlords began the process of taking white supremacy as ideology of American slavery. Wasn't built on racism so much as built in tandem with it. And we don't think ontological antagonism true conflicts inevitable in politics, but it does not have to be democrated around whiteness and oppression. The ontological fatalism only recreates colonial violence. Only the affirmative plan of focusing on the prison system and restructuring society solves Hudson 13. Exclusion not here once for all the place of death is overturned, deciding exclusion and inclusion is nowhere greater ontological sum as political and never settled modes of otherness and nor decided advances. Ontological fatalism, CDC Wilderson, the social does not have to be divided in white and black. There signifies colonialism institutes division, but this relation is contingently constructed identities rather than ultimately unfixity. Division and consider social non-colonial division. White be very dissimilar, but it's not far from avoid black being function ultimate substance of the possible form of sociality. Rather, what gets lost is specificity, ontological difference, identity, describing lived experience, whiteness, and blackness sustained by continued practice, which can be undone and anti-white. Most struggle involve reactivation and colonial objectivity, so symbolization produces an incredible access that they can't equalize. It real has no place of its own. It isn't recognized in its system, but is produced by that. It's a subject of antagonism and competition with the real of the social as distinct from the subject position based on determinate identity. And the assumption of anti-black racism as a structuring factor of American race relations presumes the continuance of settler colonialism as well as other aspects of white supremacy. We think we should analyze white supremacy from the forms of coalition that our Alexander evidence indicates, which allows an analysis of different logics of white supremacy and how they interact in the structure of civil society as a whole. Smith 12. If the United States fundamentally constitutes through genocide, Native people, white Native people, not central development, American society, Native genocide is relegated to the past. So the given sort of colonialism through student section describes Native people's racial group as a class within all non-black people of color, sexing goes as far as to redefine the settler colonial project heresy for black exceptionalism and the defined race relations in which Native people play subsidiary role. These not administrative form of racism is important to conceptualize white supremacy is operating through multiple logic rather than a single one. We may misunderstand the racial by simply explaining one logic of white supremacy through another logic. It is important to complicate how proximity to whiteness can enable different kinds of white supremacist politics. If we understand Arab Americans as racially white supremacist logic of Orientalism, it is their proximity to whiteness that allows the logic of Orientalism to operate. It is also allows them to capitalization that poses threat through the United States. This privilege signal they will be marking perpetual foreign threats to the U.S. world. As proximity to whiteness laws and disappear in white society, characterizations of whiteness are as property generally failed to encounter logics of white supremacy, and our framing of marijuana legalization undermines the construction of institutional harm that exists in civil society. Case 14. Unlike marijuana prohibition is familiar philosophy preserves social order, white supremacy. The federal law that making marijuana criminal is origins legislation that's passing atmosphere hysteria and the theory of the fairly rooted prejudices against Mexican Americans, African Americans. Racially faded history lives in the current federal policy is so driven by myth and propaganda and is almost impervious to reason. The U.S. should legalize marijuana. Should also end the drug war, but it's not enough. The war on drugs and mechanisms of social control, not like slavery, but or the systemic relegation of substandard exists in all the institutions were tools of profit criminalization of minority communities. Legalizing marijuana will not alone give society's tendency to fear of hatred. To address this, we must put cannabis prohibition of drug war in its historical context. Not word appropriate. We must frame campaigns for cannabis legalization as institutional reform efforts. So there's a public media and justice-oriented outcomes from the campaigns. We must make legalization more about taxing more than taxing revenue.
Okay.
Market revenue.
Do you have a time?
Yeah.
When does slavery end?
We'd probably argue that slavery has continued to take new forms today, and the most recent form is probably the abolition system.
What is the matrix that animates slavery as this continuous, form of domination?
The perception of the bodies that are subject to slavery as inherently outside and different from.
How does legalizing marijuana change that symbolic value that people associate with Black people?
Our Alexander evidence in the 1AC indicates that our form of coalitional approaches acknowledges the differences that occur within society.
Which
but still unites
Alexander
us.
is this?
The first piece of Alexander.
No, I'm saying which period in time, because Alexander has also come out and said that marijuana legalization would just help a bunch of white guys out, right?
Smith and
where's this evidence coming from? What period in time are we talking about?
We say that the Alexander Ted evidence indicates that
this is 2010 then.
Okay,
so
what is
your 14 evidence that brings up Michelle's Alexander discussion of how this burgeoning legalization market actually only props up fat white capitalists?
Smith and Alexander in 14 indicate that the way we need to frame marijuana legalization in the status quo is not for colorblind economic reasons, but as a social justice issue and an issue of reparation.
How does social justice account for racial domination?
How does what? Can you rephrase?
How does social justice account for racial domination? How is there going to be justice in a system which is based off of the dispossession of Black bodies, which we have said are slaves today?
The axiomatics of the 1AC, the perceptions I gave.
I don't get how do you reform a violent state, which is very basis for agency and action, is because of the genocide of indigenous people and the enslavement of Africans.
By removing its ability to be violent, we are chipping away of the civil society's.
How do you chip away at the DoD's 1033 program?
Can you explain the 1033 program?
Where the Pentagon, right? All this is militarizing these police forces, which is why Ferguson, you see these images with people with assault tanks and riot gear on.
First, through the legalization of marijuana and broader removals to remove prohibition.
How does me smoking a joint without how does that stop the cops from just wanting to pick me up for being there?
Our argument is that when we frame this as a justice issue with coalitions from people from all spectrums of politics,
justice for
all bodies that are
for all bodies. You just said that the central matrix is anti-blackness. Why?
No, the central matrix isn't anti-blackness. The central matrix is otherness.
Is based off of slavery, right?
What?
The prison. I asked you a question when slavery ended.
I said the prison system is an extension.
So if slavery never ended, if we can accept that slavery never ended, I don't understand why you're focusing on everybody if the central antagonism and problem is Black enslavement and
because it's no longer anti-blackness. It also includes things like in our Smith evidence.
I just want to put down that on the record. This is where competition is coming from. It's not anti-blackness. It's also on this other stuff that he's talking about. Put that on the record.
That long duration. All right.
How much have you had?
551 is what I had when the alarm thing went off. Does that
Okay.
sound right?
All I know is I used 4 minutes because I started after you.
Oh, yeah, we'll just put it at 6 then.
Yeah.
As long as someone's keeping track.
So I'm taking the off base blend order of the links and impacts. So I'm splitting it so that I'll find close.
It's beautiful.
Is
thing
it
about
just like
Excel.
you just flowing like straight down?
Yep.
Beautiful. All right. Yeah. Pause. I say, I lie on my back, my eyes closed, the sound of forever. Then I begin to listen. I hear birds and insects. I send these sounds away. I hear the wind. I send its sounds away. Now I hear a humming, a buzzing. It is myself, my own blood. I send its sound away. Now I think all the sounds have gone away. There should be no sound left at all, but there is still a sound. It was beneath all the other sounds. It is the sound beneath the other sounds. It is the sound of forever. It is the sound of the universe. It is the sound of God. If this sound should stop, if God should stop speaking, then the universe would die. And the speaking we can find in the pause. We need to pause because the affirmative fundamentally has forgotten how to pause. They have forgotten how immense this shit really is. That they have forgotten that it's not just marijuana laws and how they are formed or how they are oriented or how they are still how they're used and to target specific people, specifically black men and black men and women. But they don't see that it's not. They don't see that what they. The problem with what their articulation of the impacts is they see history as events rather than the longue durée history, longue durée trajectory of white over black, the longue durée trajectory of settler colonialism where indigenous peoples and black peoples have to die in order for there to be a settler state to begin with. They cannot see fundamentally that the problem is settler colonialism and anti-blackness. They cannot, they say that the problem starts in the 1930s with this criminalization of marijuana and when these laws were passed. But they don't see the beginning of it all. Because they flinch. They flinch in the face of their homo laude piece of evidence, which Demir will be talking about. What I'm saying is that the settler has no ethical right to sovereignty. The United States federal government has no ethical right to make laws, and even when it claims to make negative state action, it is always through prohibitions, regulations. That's what happened when the prohibition of alcohol was taken out. There had to be another amendment created. When the abolition of slavery had to be taken out, it had to be another amendment. But whenever these amendments are passed, they're always conditional. Like, for example, when you look at the 13th Amendment, it says that slavery and indentured servitude are illegal except when there's a crime made, meaning that whenever there's a possibility of regulations or negative state action, there's always a possibility that there's more legislation made, meaning more regulations, meaning that it is contingent, not gratuitous freedom. The affirmatives invoking of the USFG is an act of clearing out that marks indigenous bodies as a non-present. This is the invisibility argument where we're talking about, and forecloses any possibility for indigenous claims to land. This is the redness of blackness within Ellison's speech. This is a linear genocide disadvantage. Every sovereign action taken is genocide. Lawrence and Duane 05. To speak of indigenous nation and to speak of land is indigenous in ways that are neither rhetorical nor metaphorical, neither Canada nor the United States or the settler states of Latin America for that matter, which claim sovereignty over the territory they occupy, have a legitimate basis to anchor the absorption of huge portions of that territory. Settler states premised on the need to preempt indigenous sovereignty. The legal system is this through the assertion of a rule of law that is daily deployed to deny the possibility of sovereignty and to criminalize indigenous descent. Historically, however, court decisions have been a chief instrument of the disenfranchisement of Aboriginal peoples. Recently, they have alternated between enlarging the scope of the potential for a renewed relationship between the Crown and Aboriginal peoples and drastically curtailing those possibilities, which means that because they hail on the state, they foreclose the possibility that they cannot see the fundamental antagonism within settler colonialism, meaning the Smith card that they read in the three pillars of heteropatriarchy, white supremacy flow our way, because it is only through this pause that we can see and grapple with the intensity of the situation. The second disadvantage is that they ratchet down the scale of abstraction from one of gratuitous violence to one of contingent violence. They begin to say how fucked up this shit really is, and then they go down to a squirrely point of advocacy, the starting point, right? What we're saying is that starting point is bad because they see history as a series of events rather than the long durate trajectory of how slavery and settler colonialism have been shifted in order to make way for settlers. They don't see how it is. For them, it is not a question of the criminalization of black people or the settlement of indigenous land. They see history. That's what's problematic when they see history as only events. The starting point question is problematic because they don't see how it started from. They say that it started from marijuana, the marijuana laws in the 30s, but they don't see how it started from smallpox blankets and alcohol and rum for African slaves. That's when it started. Then when there was a global consensus that said, yes, Africa is the place of slaves. Yes, America is the place of opportunity. Why? Because settlers made it possible. Why? Because they created a home there. Why? Because indigenous peoples had not lived there. They don't know how to use the land properly. They're savages. They're not people. They're invisible. This is the invisibility argument we're talking about. And the next disadvantage is on the coalitions. Okay. They're fundamentally failing when they're trying to make an advantage off of coalitions. This is the anxiety of whiteness that it always wants to be there, right? The Alexander 13 evidence that says that the coalitional politics is key because without white people feeling that they could gain something from anti-race movements, they would not join at all, or that these resistance movements would not be successful in changing material conditions. Their evidence reads in Alexander 13, read in the 2AC. In retrospect, it seems clear that nothing could have been more important in the 1970s and 80s than finding a way to create a durable interracial coalition for social and economic justice. Sure. To ensure, but then it goes on to say, priority should have been given to figuring out some way for poor and working class whites to feel as though they had a stake, some tangible interest in the nascent integrated racial order, which means to say, then Lonnie Guinier points out that racial liberalism expressed in the Brown versus Board of Education and endorsed by civil rights litigators did not offer poor whites even an elementary framework for understanding why they might gain as a result of integration, meaning that the problem they have here is that whites are not integrated. This is where the double bind comes in. Here's a double bind. Either their solvency cannot work without white people, and that creates a white savior complex, or white allyship is key to solving for a globalized structure of absolute domination, but that recreates the white over black system of absolute racial domination, which ensures anti-blackness and settler colonialism. So even the advantage that they're gaining here, the inroad that they have for them to be able to speak up upon these issues is contingent, meaning they can't see the largeness of it all. They can't surrender to how immense the trouble really is. They can't see it. It's invisible to them. You know why it's invisible? Because they refuse to pause. They flinch. They can't grasp I can't emphasize the fact that how grave it is, how peoples have to die, how languages and stories and sacred histories have to be exterminated just so that there could be a state, just so white people could have a stake in coalitional movement, just so they could have, make a better home for themselves, without realizing that this home is built on top of our bodies. So that answers all their negative state action and their marijuana law reorientation advantage that they can gain. On top of that, legalization, the term itself is offensive. It becomes offensive for you at the point where it's offensive against us. It's all paperwork, legitimation, and taxes and regulations. Your demand for legalization wants us to present papers. It wants us to be legible. We're not saying that invisibility or visibility good, but you're imposing that we want to be visible. Right? Even if you didn't say it, that's what the mechanism of legalization is. It says, oh, where are your permits? Right? Because there's always regulation. Where is your license? Right? Where's your ID? Where's all that shit? Right? When all this is only possible if we are made constructed, boiled down to be made legible into their grammar of law, of how they come to understand things. They want to boil us down so they can understand us. So it's a double bind for them. It's in the world cannot see us. We're invisible. That's bad. They try to see us to make us visible. That's even worse. They're at a double bind here. They cannot escape.
Cool. Kraus?
Yeah, let me just set the time. You're good.
All right, cool. What about the 1AC as an analysis of history based on linear facts rather than comprehensive?
Because you said your starting point for analysis, what triggered your analysis are these 1930s, 40s laws of marijuana legislation. Not that there was a global consensus that Africa was a place of slaves. Not that the global consensus was that Turtle Island and all these places where indigenous peoples live are colonizable. You didn't start from the original point of construction of criminality. You just said when it started to hurt white people. And then you said maybe we need to join now.
What about marijuana prohibition is hurting white people that would incentivize us to reject it?
Because you don't get to do your drugs. Everybody knows that.
Okay,
no,
so
they don't even present any evidence that says that black people, right? Okay. It's like white people smoke all the weed. They buy all the weed. You know what I'm saying? It's really that problem.
We're talking about the 1930s. That card talks about how marijuana prohibition came from racism against Latino immigrants to the U.S. Because
See, it stemmed from there, but you didn't say from how into the U.S. You didn't even question how the U.S. came to be.
Okay, well,
what about
I only say because that's when marijuana illegalization started.
Why didn't you start from the point of criminality, the construction of criminality that marijuana laws are constructed upon? Right? If you want to make a reorientation, why don't you start from that orientation?
How does an affirmative on this topic of concerning legalization of various activities start from a point of criminality without focusing that on one of the portions of the topic?
What do you mean? You can obviously describe it as a process of the longue durée. Longue durée is meaning its existence through time and how it's transformed. You can mention all those the things on the topic along the way because they all focus under an overarching structure of construction of criminality and deviance.
Okay, what?
Right? That's what Gonzaga card talks upon. It speaks upon. Yeah, that's good, but you flinch.
How does the affirmative team flinch in the face of whiteness when they're a form of confrontation of whiteness?
Not in the face of whiteness. I'm saying that whiteness is your flinch. Because you're saying
so whiteness is what we retreat to? Is that what you're saying?
Is what?
Whiteness is where white people retreat to when confronted with racial antagonisms and the history of racial antagonism.
No. Because whiteness is many things. Whiteness is not just retreat, but it's also engagement, what your ass looks like, right? Coalitional politics. That's how whiteness invades the topic. Because you say, literally, right? What the priority should have been given to figuring out some way for whites to feel as though they had a stake. Meaning that coalitions can only work if white people feel that they have something to gain or lose.
Okay,
from
so
these struggles.
how is saying that we believe that forms of racial injustice and oppression are bad, and that's like our framing of
See,
why we
because
wish
even
to
the
join
way
the
you
movement?
slip with that terminology, racial injustice and oppression,
It's not injustice.
domination.
Dom-
It's racial domination.
Yes.
There is no kind of like, oppression, the way we think about it with degraded subjects like colonialism, right? That the land is literally that black people are attacked for no reason other than to secure the interests of the state. Here you go. The case flow and then the case flow and I'll be They should lose the debate for bringing to a Brown v. Board of Education as somehow of advocacy that may not have done a lot for black people, but start to get the ball rolling. No, this is an ahistorical view of black freedom struggle and the black radical tradition. There's always been a civil rights struggle happening since Africans landed in America as blacks as opposed to Africans anymore. That was a certain Holocaust that their Omalati evidence is discussing, but they never get to the root cause of that. Is that we're no longer considered Africans. We're not Asante. We're not, certain Bantu people. We are blacks now. That there's a complete metaphysical and cultural Holocaust which has no recognition. In addition to that, it was necessary for America to accrue the same kind of violence onto the indigenous people, which is why they are also invisible because they are present and yet absent. You are right here. We're in Nevada. There are plenty of people who are indigenous, and yet you cannot see them because of the type of violence which is placed on them. They're trying to say that this liberal reform actually did something. Bullshit. Even MLK said that I let my people into a burning house trying to deal with this. This is what they think. Only reforming the system. How do you chip away at a prison wall? This isn't Shawshank Redemption, motherfucker. This is trying to call for revolution. You can't just scoop away at the wall and hopefully you link up with Morgan Freeman at the end of the movie and everything is great. That's not what happened. They're killing black boys and girls and parts of the nation for no reason other than for the fact that they are there. This is the type of racial domination that we have to address. This is the Omalati evidence that only flows negative because they can't come to address this. This is the ongoing Holocaust. It's not purely one technology, rather it's a set of technologies that sits in all this. Additionally, their second card doesn't even have to do with what their actual project is because it focuses on nuclear annihilation and how you can have social, economic, political, racial, gender understanding of how nuclear proliferation goes down. They have to prove specific links besides just run to bring up random cards to talk about they're oppressed this way, they're oppressed that way. Then we can solve with this state reform. No, reform has never happened. It is always revolution. It is always the revolution in thought. It is always the pause. Okay. Any pragmatic approach to resolve conflicts within the world directly trades off with the pragmatic analysis. Our framework must be unflinching and hold the world to the fire of antagonism. Wilson and 10. In South Africa, during the last years, the apartheid war for revolutionary change to both the underground and above ground capacity during this period begins to central unflinching pragmatic analysis. The movement dedicated to the complete overthrow of existing order. The neoliberal compromise that the radical elements of the chartist movement made with moderate elements who are due large factor to our inability to hold moderate feet to the fire of political agenda predicated on unflinching pragmatic analysis. Instead, we allow our energy and voice of attention to space for onto pragmatic consideration. Simply put, we advocate the power to pose the question. The power to pose the question is the greatest power of all. That is why we're asking, what did I do to be so black and blue? They would say that somehow or another that the prison system, that it's marijuana legal, that it's marijuana legislation. No, we are saying that violence accrues to the black and red body for no other reason for them being there, which is what structures agency in the first place. They try to give you this classical narrative where they say that they use this causal agency, the because principle, where they locate this body that necessarily is going to keep the movie going forward. They say the United States federal government is the agent of change, that we can resolve all of our problems with this great reform. Not even resolve, but at least start to get there. No, that smooth over all the kind of historical difference that we're saying influences how agency is even constructed in the first place. The fact that you can affirm the United States federal government and think that it is a possible actor is part of the problem. This is why we have to engage in the ellipses. This is why we have to engage in the pause. This is why we have to ask the question, what did I do to be so black and blue? Brody and 5. The ellipses appears to decompose the page's pieces. The ellipses runs versus an everyday occurrence. Concurring with Fred Moon's idea that it is an intense relationship between experimentalism and the everyday that animates radical artistic practice in the second half of the 20th century. In Ellison's text, the ellipsis can be read as a site that invites improvisation. Ellipses as a present figure of the absence of paradoxy, more meaningful rather than meaningless, rather than seeing the ellipses as empty, not doing acting on the page. They can be rethought as active agents as the suture and call response of Ellison's dialogue and other spaces of Marshall Hall. The readers participate, invite the audience into imagine engagement into the text, the ongoing black and blue tradition of the changing safety. The same has been documented and replayed by many who subscribe to the aesthetic theoretical idea that is in the break of the music of the movement and visibility and improvisation to take place. We pause real quick. Place on Marquette Place. We need to break out of all of the ideological and paradigmatic considerations that try to say that we can use the USFG as an actor, or that we can use the same kind of apparatuses of like democracy or justice
Thank you.
All right, order is decarceration advantage, solvency, and negative case. Right. Look at the email.
Oh.
Yeah. Just on the chain.
Yeah. You can go.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Sure. We can flash it real quick.
It's cool.
You can start.
Okay, you got it right there. All right, cool.
Listen.
Yeah. The primary question of this debate should be whether or not the affirmative reduces the number of people that are put in prison. We do extend out the first Alexander card. The prohibition of marijuana is the newest form of social control put on, created by civil society. Marijuana is the starting point because it is the newest form. We need to challenge that. We need to challenge that first. The issue here is solvency. The app is the only way to address these problems. We need to build a broader coalition. Otherwise, we won't solve. If the source of racism comes from white people, then convincing white people that what they're doing is wrong is the only way to solve. Otherwise, it just gets reproduced. We're the only way to do that. They say we don't speak to domination. Look, our framing of this issue as a justice issue is the way that we build that coalition to be able to solve. And we do speak to this domination. That's the BW card and the first Alexander card, say that this is the part of the broader extermination of people of color put on by civil society. And they say Brown versus Board means we lose the round. Look, the Alexander card talks about Brown versus Board in terms of how while it may have been a small positive reform, it did not do what it really needed to, and we needed a broader coalition to build around it. That's what the app does. We build that broader coalition. We build that broader coalition to be able to solve. And also, Brown versus Board proves how the small things can be positive. Can be positive. School segregation was objectively bad, and it was good. That's what the app does. They simply don't address racial domination. We condemn it. We want to get rid of it. We want to get rid of it. On the Wilderson card, about unflinching, about we have to be unflinching. Look, we still need reforms. It's the only way to solve these forms of domination. We're the only ones that build the wider coalition. Also, challenging the prison industrial complex is critical to indigenous resistance. Prison expansion is a tool of colonialism. August 14. I write this from the position of California Indian women, nutritional waste behavior, and conduct Native women when criminalizing enforcement of these new laws. Native people were locked up in spectrum, punishing institutions, large portion of people who ended behind bars. Indigenous 125 Native Americans are under these jurisdictions of the criminal system. Native American would make up 32% of the prison population, but Davis describes the prison industrial complex where racism, social control, poverty, experience, racial subordination, repression, and economic exploitation. Not only the prison industrial complex was built on the ancestral lands of the indigenous people. Also, possibly the Smith card here. Smith says that the only focusing on hate and blackness can't solve. There are other forms of racism. Look, people of all races are in prison as a result of marijuana, and those people are enslaved in the prison. Are enslaved as part of the prison industrial complex. They're forced to do things like produce license plates for pennies on the dollar. That's a modern form of slavery. That everyone who's in prison for marijuana experiences also strategic resistance through institutional change can allow us to understand, expose, and destabilize whiteness. This is Power 5. As we think about institutional range, we must think about the way that we're for routine expression experience of space. I don't reminds us that the way institutions are arranged will either mutilate, provide space for the emancipation or being for those of us with privilege. We must use those privileges we cannot reject to better understand, expose, destabilize structures that support whiteness. We must raise the cost of maintaining whiteness by seeking strategic interventions that reduce racial disparities and exclusion of white people. Is a self-fulfilling prophecy means you can't ever cause change. It's called 95. The genius of movement was open to involvement in rock with a spectrum of black and white people's wishes to make a contribution to a message of usually beneficial racial harmony, change public attitudes, the way institutions function, test more minimal tape because the issues more complex, multifaceted, broad mass based organizing public acceptance of the math that main elements needed today. They must be received before any strategic reform is possible. Some of the mass economic dislocation described by providers listening religious support for project with public doing. I much emphasis on the interest one group disrupts the ability to draw American people into the true collective interest mark at market interest, and they say we can't use the USFG. Look, we don't specifically say the USFG is key. We just want to, we just say that our movement can be able to starting point to change USFG policies. And look, we're not saying that the state is necessarily good. We just want to use it to create change. We might move beyond it. We're using the master's tools to stop the racial domination that happens because of state policy on insolvency. We solve the end goal of the 1AC is to end the race-based class system. We do this through legalizing marijuana. That creates a system that can do this. I extend the lead card here saying that marijuana empirically creates movements that move forward and extend the Alexander 10 card coalition anti-racism key builds a broader movement. If the broad coalition of people is included, racism just gets reproduced onto the critique. First, extend the Davis evidence, saying that we say that we perform of destroying race prisons are instances of colonialism that must be destroyed. Also, maybe racism is older than simply slavery. It goes back. The starting point is much older, but because we talk about racism, we're able to solve back. They say we pause and we forget about how quote immense shit is. Look, we talk about the domination that happens because of the race-based class system, and we specify it to marijuana. We're the ones doing that. We're the ones doing that analysis. We're the ones doing that analysis. We don't forget how that stuff is. The fact that we read the Omo Law cards means that we don't forget how massive this stuff is. We're just trying to build a starting point to be able to solve for this. Also, they say we don't have the right to solve through prohibition. That amendments are always conditional. Look, hey, we don't put on more regulations for marijuana. We set them across the money. See, we just get rid of all prohibitions. We don't create anything similar to what alcohol prohibition did. This is just a misinterpretation of what we were saying. Also, extend the buoy evidence that political forms that political forms can solve back for anti-blackness and reform the structure of civil society. That's able to solve back. And they say our starting point is they say that our starting point is bad, but the first extent our cycling card saying that practical reforms are the key to building this movement. Otherwise, people just reject it. And there's a backlash. They say we retreat to our whiteness, but including white people is the only way we're going to be able to build this broader movement to solve the simple reactionaryism is bad. They say they're the optimistic ones. They're not the optimistic ones. They're the ones that say that reform is impossible. We're the optimistic ones. Extend right here is the bell. It's the hooks card saying that optimism is the only way to build this broader movement. We're the only ones that are able to access any form of solvency. Also, extend the Hudson card. Fatalism just recreates that violence.
We got 6:15. Is that what it was?
Or
Six.
Six straight.
Yeah.
All right. Just putting in 4. Right at a time. 15 seconds.
Cool. What are you doing here? Where's Jeff?
He's, I don't know, so he's coming. He's a liar. He said he's coming on Sunday. How's Kansas going?
I don't know. I don't get to like up the line. I need to talk to him about. Let me see.
Right.
Both teams won their first today.
Nice.
Thanks.
You get a couple more?
Yeah.
How did everybody else do that? Language.
Umber and Omar, they will force you to clear out secret points. And then Ember and Jack went 3-3. Graciela and Remo went 2-4.
Going on the critique, the off case, and then the case.
So the one and C first, I guess. Switching it up.
Actually, no, I'm kidding. Well, doesn't that just point straight down, right? Oh, okay, whatever.
No.
It's all good. All right,
Wait, so what is?
case off.
Okay.
Ready? Okay. From the 1 AR, I was hearing that the 2 AR is going to be like, you have to do something. You have to do something about the criminalization and the incarceration of people of color. Yeah, that's how it's going to sound like. But what we're saying is that the framing question should rather be not that does the act lower the number of people in prison. Actually, first off, they don't, because they don't. There is no way for them to acknowledge the gravity of the long delay of the situation, which is the originary violence that created the criminality of black people, black people, and the settling of indigenous peoples, meaning for the creation of the settler state and society. The fundamental question relies on this antagonism, and the two pieces of conceded evidence that is devastating for them, you should already be circling negative. First is the Lawrence dual piece of evidence that the settler state has no ethical right to sovereignty, so that even if they may pass laws or create ethical or quote-unquote ethical reforms to be able to reduce the number of people in prisons, it will not resolve the fact that the United States exists, that the United States has and continues to exist only by occupying indigenous people's lands and by encroaching upon indigenous people's sovereignty. That's what Lawrence and Dewar is saying, that a settler state is premised on the need to preempt indigenous sovereignty. That's why the Office of Bureau in Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Affairs have to create courts and steal jurisdiction from reservations themselves, and to prevent tribes from accessing retrocession, meaning that they can't access their sovereignty back. This is a fundamental antagonism about the legal structure of the United States, which trades off from native sovereignty, which is a separate external disad that you can already vote on. Second is the Wilson disad, which is the foreclosure disad. The foreclosure disad says that any pragmatic approach directly trades off with the paradigmatic analysis. Our framework must be unflinching and hold the world to the fire of antagonism. This is the Wilson and 10 card the evidence which says that any he saw how essential an unflinching paradigmatic analysis to a movement dedicated to the complete overthrow of the existing order. The existing order is not just how many people in prisons, but the fact that prisons exist, and the fact that the originary violence to create criminality exists. It is the police, the bureaucracies, it is the state, and it all is agencies. It's all that. It's not just the laws that are passed, because even if you can have these even if you have regulations on what cops can search for, they'll search for something else. They will always do that because they exist, right? Because there's that concept of justice that they can't your concept of justice about state-sanctioned retribution, that the state must be able to find who's at fault and target them, make them at fault, even if there wasn't any fault. Next, the next reason that they lose is they drop the double bind argument, which I said was that either their sovereignty cannot work without white people, and that creates a white savior complex, or white allyship is key to solving for a globalized structure of absolute domination, but that recreates a white over black system of absolute racial domination that is the lifeblood of the long array of anti-blackness and settler colonialism. They're saying that the whiteness is a retreat from the situation, but no, we're saying the whiteness is also an active engagement with the situation, which means that their coalition of politics is the manifestation and performance of how whiteness invades the space and tries to foreclose a revolutionary questioning, a revolutionary pause, to understand the gravity of the situation in order to ratchet down the scale of abstraction, to see that the problem is not the overall overarching structure of criminality that is created, or the police, or the bureaucracies, or the reservations, or the land trees and titles, but is the fact that there's some laws that can be changed. They're not going to be changed. If you understand to be longue durée, you understand that it's only a reorientation of the system in order to cater to liberal desires, rather than to actually hold the world to the fire of antagonism. The next reason that they lose is the homologous piece of evidence that which flows negative. They flinch in the face of what they read. They understand how massive it is. They understand their complicity in the subject and how their existence is directly parasitic off of the criminalization of black bodies and the settlement of indigenous lands, which always results in the extermination of actual peoples, of our bodies, of our languages, sacred cultural rights, and the taking of our sacred places where we can remember our ancestors. Those are forever lost to us, and that is something that they can never recuperate, which means that they do not solve. And the only thing that solves, by the way, first of all, that again, that there was no permutation made, meaning that there is no meaning there's no reason that these two positions can be incompatible. They are directly incommensurable, which brings us to the alternative evidence, which is the Brody piece of evidence that says that we should wallow in the question, what did I do to be so black and blue? Only then, by wallowing in that question of why was I beaten, why was I criminalized, I didn't do shit, I'm just smoking weed just like these white people do, but then I get caught, but then my land gets taken, but then my languages become prohibited because I have to learn this colonial language. Why? There is no reason. There is no logical utilitarian reason. This violence is gratuitous. It's made for no reason at all. It is so that white people and those people of color who align themselves with whiteness could have a sense of self. Only until we wallow in that question can we start to think about revolution and actually overthrowing the order. Meaning, if you default to the framing question of the affirmative, if they actually lower the number of people in prison, they don't. They lose. The absolves. Only in the echo, in the pause. The ellipse is like pause. Before the pause, within the pause, after the pause, during the pause, you hear the echo in the pause. Echo, reverberations of how this shit really is so fucking real, pervasive, intense, embedded into our psyche's collective unconscious that precedes political economy. They lose. They can't see this shit. We're invisible.
145?
That's what you said.
Order is going to be, I guess, case and criticism. Oh, that's all kind of cool. Is everybody ready?
Where were you going?
Advantage, then the K.
Oh,
the best way to put it.
same order.
Yeah, basically.
What is order?
It's bad. All right. Everybody ready?
Yes.
The two in our characterization of the two areas are right, and that's because this debate comes down to competing methodologies. We're going to say that we do something which is better than doing nothing. Our method is an optimistic engagement and chipping away the tendrils of the civil state that allow to execute violence against authorized bodies. The alternative implemented in the 2NR is a rejection of civil society at face value in favor of acceptance of the pause. Vote affirmative because our methodology of engaging with civil society to remove its powers is a net better way to generate change and remove the racist politics of the status quo and to reform the way that white supremacy operates. There are a couple of reasons to vote affirmative. We think that the 1AR extension of the 2AC axiomatic analysis that we need to start from marijuana prohibition is the best thing. The idea in this debate is that marijuana prohibition is an institution, a new form of racist and social control. That is why marijuana legalization is the best methodology for optimistic engagement with civil society. It creates the affirmative will visualize the structure of the violence that allows to justify the proximate cause of violence by continuing to throw people into prison in the first place, because we acknowledge the fact that marijuana prohibition is the next step in our attempt to create violence against the other. The first piece of Alexander evidence that has been extended to the framing question this entire debate indicates that this is the form of social control that replicates things like the Jim Crow laws of old, and the idea of a structural antagonism that posits some bodies as inferior and other bodies as superior and dominant. The affirmative is a good starting point of analysis for this that allows the justification of odds according to the Memmi evidence as well as the Oblada evidence running the 1AC. The reading of the Memmi and Oblada evidence as well as the Alexander evidence indicates that marijuana prohibition isn't something that's analyzed in the abstract. However, is a contextualization of the way that violence, the way violence manifests itself within society. Extend the tweets of the Davis evidence. The prisons are a new way to dispose of the outsiders. Our Memmi evidence indicates allows to justify race violence. Instead of trying to deal with them through things like Jim Crow laws and lynching, we throw them into prison. We subject them to slave-like conditions outlined in the 1AR. The entirety of the conditions outlined throughout the entirety of the 1AC. We force them to work to do things like clean up our roads and make prison to make license plates for pennies on a dollar. We pretend they don't exist. That's our Davis evidence. With this, the affirmative challenge to the prison industrial complex challenges the ability of the prison to invisibilize this violence. That solves back the majority of the arguments about the invisibility of oppressed bodies in the status quo. The affirmative. We are forming our forms of form and negative state action. Nothing about the 1AC action affirms the legitimacy of the state. We say that a rallying point centering around the idea of marijuana prohibition is a good way to analyze the new structures and merging tendencies of civil society and the state to exact violence against other bodies. Our Ogden evidence, our Ogden 14 evidence in the 1 hour is an example of these types of intersections. Also intersects their argument against our framing question of do we remove people from prison when they say that we need to analyze the fact that the state prevents tribes from regaining their sovereignty. Our Ogden evidence indicates that form of violence against indigenous bodies where we take the land away from them has been remanifested in the prison system. The Ogden evidence and the Davis evidence both prove that the way we invisibilize violence, particularly against black and brown bodies as well as indigenous bodies, is through the prison system, which means that analysis of the prison industrial complex and generating coalitional movements to stop the prison industrial complex from enacting new forms of violence using civil society and the state is the best methodology for achieving reform. Also, this non-reformist reform analysis answers back their Wilderson argument. It indicates that we use for the paradigmic analysis and unflinching analysis of the way that racism structures modern civil society, aka that racism is now structured and manifests itself in civil society through the process of marijuana prohibition and throwing black and brown bodies in jail so we can ignore them, pretend that they don't exist. That means that we hold this in creative tension with political conditions that exist now. The fact that marijuana prohibition, throwing people in jail and convicting them of holding marijuana and broader war on drugs policies allows us to justify things like not giving them public assistance and ignoring their votes when democracy happens. It's the fundamental antagonism of the 2NR as outlined is that civil society and the United States federal government are bad. We sell back. Non-reformist reform removes the ability of the United States federal government and civil society to enact the most modern form of racial prejudice and the visibilization of otherized bodies in the status quo and forces a confrontation with the acts of whiteness that exists. That's also indicated first in the 1AC Alexander evidence about coalitions, which indicates that the reason white dominance emerged in the first place is because of exclusion of white bodies. We use class analysis to justify that the white bodies must be superior to the black bodies because white bodies must be superior to black bodies, which cause the racial divisions we experience now. The Alexander evidence indicates that when we reintegrate white bodies with this form of movement, we acknowledge the fact that the racial and skin color differences that we have now aren't the actual difference. The Clark and Powell evidence, either read in the 1AR, make these same arguments. We should probably call for them at the end of the round. The Powell evidence indicates that resistance through institutional change allows us to understand and expose the history of whiteness that exists in institutions, aka by analyzing how marijuana prohibition stems from things like the Jim Crow laws and structuring antagonisms of society. The Clark evidence indicates that when we can continue to exclude white people, we continue to, this is actually a diss against their methodology. When we continue to exclude the white body from it, we engage in self-fulfilling prophecy where white bodies aren't forced to confront the privilege that they have in the status quo. Only the affirmative force them to confront that form of privilege. If people don't change now, there's only risk that we can create that change by forcing them to confront that whiteness exists and it exacts hideous forms of violence in the status quo. They accuse of being parasitic in the 2NR that we began the entirety of what I see according to our prison culture evidence from the assumption that racism and the prison industrial complex are inherently bad things. We read this evidence as a form of speaking with and joining the call for substantial reforms, not only marijuana prohibition, but the war on drugs. Our affirmative is not an endpoint, but a starting point. Our ultimate horizon is abolition of the prison industrial complex and the war on drugs, but in the short term, the best approach is strategic decarceration. That means that we have a couple of dissads also that are first is the Smith evidence, which is a dissad, indicates that they are inherently uncoalitional because they're folks that anti-black racism is a structurally ontological antagonism of violence ignores the intersection of white supremacy that with a coalitional approach can solve back for. Second is the policy dissad. Our Booley evidence indicates anti-black racism isn't necessarily ontological, but is also constituted by a policy that's around these bodies. That means that by accepting and confronting the whiteness within marijuana prohibition, we can resolve that for the ontological conditions because the ontological condition or the policy conditions construct the way that being exists. Finally, the pessimism dissad. Our Hooks evidence indicates a pessimistic stance that society, the United States federal government cannot be changed accepts racism as a fundamental axiom that always pits white against non-white and otherwise bias that ruins coalitions and prevents the ability to actually solve racialized violence. That was above on the Alexander analysis. Brown?
What happened?
Nothing happened.
Oh, maybe for the decision.
Oh, you want me to?
I don't know.
I don't care.
Alright. Okay. Libby, dude. You do it all the time.
If you do, I was gonna step out, so if you ask for anything, it's in the email thing. That's all I was saying.
That's for what?
Oh, if you ask for evidence,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
all in the email chain. Or mine is.
If not, I have it all in here anyway, but.
Y'all are DP, right?
Yes.
Sweet.
Oh, wait. Is that any Thanksgiving? Actually, you don't remember who's spring break?
This was a good debate. I voted for the negative. I thought that the 2AR really just doesn't address some of the fundamental link arguments that the NAG has been making throughout the debate. Versus the Wilderson flinching disad. I think they've impact turned piecemeal institutional reform, say that it trades off with revolution, and revolution's key, otherwise you're stuck in particular historical moments, which ignores the broader trajectory of racial domination. The second one is this double-blind argument that either white people are key to your movement succeeding, which creates a savior complex, or there has to be a form of allyship, which causes assimilation and forecloses revolutionary potential. And the third sort of, I don't know if I'd characterize this as a link argument, maybe more of an impact, is that they've recharacterized a lot of your 1AC evidence, and they've you've not challenged those recharacterizations, and instead just sort of extended your evidence, which they've made arguments about why those are impacts for the NAG, and why your evidence has some tension with other parts of your 1AC. So they're also a criticism of the notion of starting points and endpoints. So I think the way that you frame the AF is problematic when you don't really engage that question. And I think their alternative solves those link arguments. So maybe the alternative doesn't immediately abolish the prison system, or maybe it doesn't result in people being able to smoke joints, but it certainly deals with their criticism of time. The fundamental problem in this debate, as the 2NR points out, is that you don't have a permutation, a substantive disad to the alternative, e.g., why would revolution fail? Why would pause fail? To destroy the prison system or rupture the fundamental antagonism of settler colonialism or anti-blackness? And you just don't really have a particular impact turn of reform good that you've gone for. You just sort of say coalitions can do stuff. And you don't really have in my mind, an impact turn that competes with the NAG. Also the sort of time allocation of the 2AR, you waited till the very bottom to get to sort of your offense to the alternative, of here's why the alternative is bad. You got 25 seconds left. I think that the stuff you were talking about at the bottom, usually your pessimism argument and stuff like that, that needs to be sooner in the 2AR. It needs to be developed. Why is the alternative pessimism? They've pointed out that they're a better form of optimism. I'm not entirely sure why, but I'm not entirely sure why they're pessimism either. Why does that matter? What does it mean in context of the rest of the debate? So you haven't really explained these things in the 2AR, you're just kind of extending them because you're running out of time. And so I just think that there's just a lot of these link arguments that you haven't really beaten after the 2AR that are problematic and just sort of are good impact turns to the way you frame the NAC. I don't know how consistent this would be with your strategy, but when you have a process where they say, we are legalization, but that just means there's no criminal penalty for smoking weed, they say we don't impose regulations. You're correct to point out that that's not how it works, that there have to be licensing and permits. But after the app says that, I think they're gonna lose the T. I realize it might not be consistent, desirable. But once they say that, they're like, the plan is this legalization, and they're like, we don't impose regulations, because they're trying to get out of link arguments. You shouldn't say that. You're gonna lose the T. Legalization has to include regulations. Because what they are is their decriminalization, which in the sort of framing intent, the James Herndon sense of things, is the core negative argument, is that we should be able to debate about whether those regulations are good or bad. The way that we do that is the negative should be able to say, remove criminal penalties, but don't enforce regulations. The app should have to defend some regulations. They might not have to specify what those are, but they should definitely have to defend that they impose some regulations. When they say that, to try and get out of your link arguments, it's like game over on T argument. Again, realize that it might not be, the way that the 1 and C is presented, it might not be consistent to also be like, you're not topical, but I mean.
How do you feel about like block T arguments?
Sure, the 2 and C's are constructive. But once that happens, you're setting yourself up in a bad situation. You're banking on the net not making that T argument, right? Because I think in most other cases, had they been like, what does legalization mean? You would say there would have to be some form of regulation on marijuana.
Yeah.
Right. So don't say the opposite of that. If you're not ready to defend that, don't say the opposite. Yeah. So that was just a thought I had about the cross-sects of the 1AC. I will say that I think I judged you last year. I think you've gotten a lot better. So keep it up. And I thought like you had some very persuasive moments. I just think that sort of the time allocation and sort of the choice of arguments you're making don't really address some of the bigger questions that the negative has introduced. And like it's okay to defend like reformism. It's okay to defend that legalization is a good starting point. You need to go like a step further. What about the negative strategy makes those things impossible? And you need to do more than say like coalitions are good because you exclude white people, they can't learn that they're racist. I mean, you got to go further than that, right? The implication of the AF is eventually you would like to lead to the abolition of the prison system. In this debate, you don't really have arguments about why the prison system is the nexus of the fundamental antagonism, or why the fundamental antagonism has developed in such a way that it is now primarily manifested through the prison system. And I think, I don't know if Ben can tell me I'm wrong, I think some of Cal's cards that they read for their AF might help you make some of these claims. That the prison system or using marijuana as sort of a gateway to confront the prison industrial complex is a good starting point. I think some of their cards are pretty good on this. So you might want to check those out. Yeah. It might help you sort of make these claims about coalition building. But as it is, in this debate, you just kind of have these broad claims without much depth or explanation about how, A, it changes the world. You're just kind of asserting that you make civil society better, and B, how it interacts with an A. Questions, comments, concerns, funny jokes, weekend stories? Great. Well, good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can unplug you. That's a question.
Better than a physician assistant.
Do you want to top the mic?